There is one thing that every Aspie needs, and we've got 4 considerations to help explain this. And as always, we save the best till last. So you want to watch all the way to the end of this. Now, I've got a qualified physician. I've got a qualified accountant. I've got a qualified financial advisor. I've got a qualified neurologist. I've got a qualified cardiologist. I've got a qualified physical therapist. I've got qualified attorney. Actually, I've got a bunch of friends who are lawyers. I've got a qualified auto mechanic. Yeah, I've got a guy who's in his 60s and he knows everything there is to know about cars if you could possibly know it. He's one of those guys, you get him on the phone and you run the engine and he can tell you what type of vehicle it is. Sometimes he can tell you the model, the make, the size of engine. Anyhow, he's qualified. That's the type of people you need in your life, qualified. Now, the one thing that Aspie needs is a qualified therapist. My opinion, disagree if you want, but let me tell you why. And here are 4 things you need to consider. And again, the most important thing is at the very end. We've got 4 of these things. Number 1 is consider what is at stake. Your mental health is the foundation of your entire life. If your brain is out of kilter, your mind, I should say, is out of kilter, if something's amiss there, it affects, just everything. It affects your family. It affects your job. It affects your education. Anything in your life. It all hinges on this one thing. So it is so important to have somebody in your life who is a specialist. So number 1 is this. Consider what is at stake. Now, consideration number 2 is there is no substitute for a qualified therapist. Now, keep in mind, I'm using the adjective qualified before all of these things. I got a qualified physician. I don't need just any physician. I want somebody who's qualified, somebody who knows what they're doing. I need a qualified attorney. I don't need just anybody who just got out of law school. I wish them well, but I need somebody who knows my circumstances and my situation who is qualified. Auto mechanic again. I need somebody who knows their way around an automobile, and same thing is true with a therapist. You need somebody who is qualified, and there is no substitute for that. Now, the reason I say that is I love to make YouTube videos, and there are a lot of people who love to make YouTube videos, and some of them have this niche where they focus on Asperger syndrome or other mental health issues. But folks, watching YouTube videos, as important as they are, because you have like immediate access 24/7, I get it, but they're not a substitute. And many of the people who are making these videos, like me, come from a perspective of life experience, which is important, vitally important. I'm nearly 70 years old and I've learned a thing or two, and I like to share with people what I've learned. I've been an Aspie since before I was born. So whatever stage of life you were in, been there, done that. Maybe not exactly the same thing you're going through, but I've gone through that stage of life, unless you're like in your 80s. But still, that is no substitute for somebody who is qualified to be a therapist, because they deal with this. If you get someone who specializes in autism, they've been doing this, they do this all day long. They go to the office, they talk to people, they study it, they went to school and studied it, they are experts. Now, I know there are some people out there who are better than others, and maybe you've had a bad experience in your life with a therapist, but still. People who make YouTube videos are not good substitutes for therapists. Your friends and family, as important as they are, and I don't mean to discount those people. I'm just saying that a podcast is not the same as a counseling session. And your friends and family, they have good intentions, I hope, but still, they're not qualified. They don't know the ins and outs. They're just making off-the-cuff suggestions or observations, which I guess are useful, and you can take those to your therapist and talk about it, but they're just not a good substitute. All right, consideration number 3 is this. When you talk to a therapist, you will get individual attention. So, yes, YouTube videos are excellent. I think so. If the person actually knows what they're talking about and they come from a life perspective where they have gone through it and they've done that, if they really know what they're talking about, I'm all for it. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing it if I wasn't. But that's not the same as getting individual attention from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. And that's what a therapist is. That is somebody who gives you individual attention. So you go into the office, you sit down, you have a conversation with a person, they ask you questions. And so from their education and their study and their full-time experience working with people, they can help you out tremendously. I can interact with people. You know, you can, and I do. You put a message, a comment at the end of this video in the comment section, and I will interact with you. But that's not the same as sitting down with somebody and exploring their personal needs. And besides that, I'm not a qualified expert. My laboratory, my education has been life. I call it life's laboratory, and I've learned a lot of things, and I want to share those with you. But still, it's not the same as giving somebody individual attention from the perspective of a professional. And number 4, and finally, is this. And I told you this is the single most important thing. And that is a therapist will give you individual personal interaction. It's not just that they give you attention, which is obviously very important, but they're also interacting with you. They ask you questions on purpose. They know which questions to ask you. So when I talk to people on YouTube and others talk to people on YouTube, we're speaking in general terms, and we may focus on something that applies to somebody else. May apply to you, may not, may a little bit apply to you, maybe not, but a therapist, it's personal attention, and then they move that to interaction, where you sit down, you have a conversation, and they can explore what you're going through on that one-on-one basis. So that is so very important. My opinion, disagree with me if you want. That's why we have a comment section. You can agree with me, I hope so, in the comment section as well. But that's it. You need, the one thing that I think every Aspie needs is a therapist. And no, you don't have to go see him every week or every month. Sometimes it may be years before you see your therapist, but you got to have somebody, my opinion, got to have somebody that you can call up and talk to, set an appointment where you go in and have that one-on-one personal help. Trauma is an emotional response to something that happened in the past, usually something that was terrible or horrible, some event or series of events that keep surfacing today and express itself as panic, or as we would say for people with Asperger syndrome, meltdowns. Now, it's hard to imagine there is anyone who has Asperger syndrome who is not, at some point in time, had some serious episodes in their life that were traumatic. In fact, now normally when we think of traumatic events, we think of maybe a tornado or a hurricane comes through, or maybe I don't think anyone in America today would experience this unless you're an immigrant, but, you know, have a bomb dropped on you. Yeah, some people have gone through that, seriously. All right, some war veterans, Vietnam War veterans, probably know what that's all about. That is a traumatic event. And at the time, there was nothing you could do about it. So let's take those traumatic events, you know, a hurricane or tornado, or somebody being shot at on the battlefield and bombs dropping all around them. And let's say that a child went through that. Only the traumatic event was not a storm or military conflict, but it was childhood experiences of what? Rejection, humiliation, frustration, feeling repulsed by others, loneliness, and it wasn't something that happened all at once. Now, there may have been very defined experiences, but for a person with Asperger syndrome, this would be something that was prolonged, protracted, sometimes over years. Seriously. And as a little kid with nobody to turn to and not knowing what to do, that can be terribly traumatic. And it expresses itself later through what we would call panic or, again, a meltdown. So this is I was going to say it's a fairly serious topic. It's a very serious topic. It's something that we need to confront, and we need to confront it face on. So let's do that right now. But before we get to the 8 things, I want to insert this so you get a little better idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma and the panic that comes afterwards. And I've got 3 real quick illustrations. I once heard of a woman, I didn't meet her, but I once heard of a woman who panicked every time there was any snow, ever. I mean, you could have a little light dusting of snow and she would go into panic mode. And it turns out that at one point in time in her life, she was caught in a blizzard. I don't remember if she was a child at the time or she was an adult. But that's an example of trauma expressing itself as panic later in life. Another example, I once knew a woman who was terrified of birds. She would visit somebody's home and they had a little canary, in the cage, and it would terrify her. And if those people would let the canary out of the cage, poor little girl, she'd go berserk. And even after she grew into an adult, she still went berserk. I mean, she couldn't help it. It was just an automatic response that dated back to an earlier traumatic experience. And I asked her, why are you afraid of birds? And she said, well, when she was little, her cousin locked her in some kind of an outbuilding, like a shed, and there was a bird or birds, maybe it was a chicken coop, I don't actually know. And they just locked her in there, and these birds were terrified her because they were flying back and forth and fluttering, really kind of harmless. But to a little girl, she said no. And the third example was there was a guy that I knew who was terrified of frogs. Yeah, frogs. And he wasn't shy about it. He told people, and they thought it was funny, his coworkers, and it was kind of funny. The guy's afraid of frogs. And what prompted me to ask him was not only that it was well known that he was terrified of frogs, but he had this little porcelain frog that sat on his work desk because one of his coworkers gave it to him. It was kind of a joke, but it was that type of joke where it was a friendly joke, So he kept that porcelain frog on his desk to remind him constantly that his friends in the workplace kind of cared about him, So I asked him, why are you afraid of frogs? Did you have an experience when you were a kid? And it turns out he had the same experience that the girl had, where somebody had locked him in an outbuilding of some kind that had frogs in it. And I don't know, he's probably 4 or 5 years old. Maybe he really didn't tell me how old he was, but I was just guessing. So every time he encountered a frog, he'd go into meltdown mode. He would panic. He would go berserk. Now, people with Asperger syndrome, they were once locked into a building with other kids. And it wasn't like for a few minutes, like the guy with frogs and the girl with birds or chickens, whatever they were. But they were locked in it all day long, day after day after day after day. It's like somebody who is living at home with abusive parents or somebody else who's abusive. But they were locked in the school building with these little people who terrorized them day after day, week after week, year after year. It was a prolonged, traumatic experience. And there are some other examples. You just draw from your experience. As a person with Asperger syndrome, what traumatic experiences did you have to face? And now you have to cope with a panicking that we call the meltdowns that are a product or an expression of that trauma, which is still there. The traumatic experience is still being lived over and over and over again, even though school, maybe years, decades in my case, in the past, but still those traumatic experiences manifest themselves through meltdowns, through panic. Okay, what are the 8 secrets? We are going to go over these fairly quickly, so you need to listen fast. Number 1 is this: simply create an awareness of the original cause of the trauma. That's kind of easy, but just remember, evoke your memory. What did you go through in school or playground or wherever you happen to be where you were traumatized? And just remember, think about it. How hard is that? So the second thing is this: reverse engineer that cause. Okay, now that you have it in your memory, go back and reverse engineer it, asking yourself, what was it about that experience? And you may have already done this, but what was it about that experience, that prolonged experience, that I found so traumatic, that I found so difficult to face? What is it about that? Second thing is to reverse engineer the cause. Third thing is to reverse engineer the traumatic response. Okay, now we're talking up to date, right now. The last time you had a meltdown, the last time you panicked, stop and think about that. Or the next time, stop and think about it. And ask yourself, what is it that is triggering that response at that point in time? Reverse engineer it. It could be that you are in a crowded place, and that triggers the traumatic response, the panic, the meltdown. It could be that you were with an individual, maybe a stranger, maybe a friend, and you go into lockdown mode. You know, that very self-conscious thing where people with Asperger's syndrome find themselves almost like it's a different personality. And you don't want to be self-conscious, and you don't want to tighten up, and you don't want to go in that safe space in your brain. You want to be outgoing and courteous and friendly if you possibly can. I don't know, maybe you don't, but most of us do. You want to go there, so we need to stop and reverse it. And then, when I say reverse it, go back and think through what it is we are experiencing, or you are experiencing. And then apply reason. So we're going to neutralize it by acknowledging that our response is not really logical, it's not reasonable, it's not rational. Now, if you were attacked by a lion when you were a kid, maybe somebody watching had that experience. And now as an adult, you were terrified every time you see a cat. Stop and think about that. Seriously, can that cat eat me? Well, if you're a little bird, yeah, the cat can eat you. And that woman I knew that was terrified of birds, she'd probably be perfectly fine with cats around her house. But go back and reverse engineer it. Think through it. Ask yourself, is my reaction, my meltdown, reasonable? Is this the right way to respond? I mean, the terror has gone. Now, with people with Asperger syndrome, sometimes the cause, not the imagined cause, but the real cause, will keep emerging, keep inserting itself in our lives. Because we have that thing where we withdraw, where we become extremely self-conscious, inhibited, and people see that, and they take advantage of us just like they did when we were little kids. They never grew up. I mean, they really, really haven't. I know people in their 70s and 80s who are abusive. I mean, they're just like mean little bullies on the playground. They just never grew up. They're children in adult bodies. But the point is, go back and ask yourself, is my response rational? Is it reasonable? There's a thing in the Bible that says, when I was a child, I thought as a child, but now I'm grown up, or, I'm paraphrasing, but something to that extent. So, yeah, it makes perfect sense that a little kid in elementary school or even junior high school, middle school, would be traumatized by peer rejection, isolation, being insulated from those that you crave to be around and you need their approval. It makes perfect sense. But you're not a kid anymore. We need to understand as we reverse engineer this thing, why am I reacting like a 7-year-old? You know, I'm nearly 70. Does it make sense for me to behave like a 7-year-old? Well, maybe if I have dementia, which I don't think I do, then it would make sense. But otherwise, I got to ask myself, why am I doing this? Now, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but that gets us well onto the road to coping effectively with the difficulty. Okay, so that brings us to number 4, and that is to rationalize rather than rationalize the exaggerated response. Now, that's going to take some explaining, but what happens is when we go into meltdown mode, we will rationalize that response sometimes. Say, well, that makes perfect sense why I did that. Well, I have a good reason to do that. We're rationalizing it. We're taking that thing where we have cognitive conflict and we're trying to work out that conflict by making an excuse, cognitive dissonance. So we don't like that dissonance, so we're trying to bring it all together. And again, some of those triggers, like high-pitched noises. I knew a woman who could not stand somebody whistling. Apparently she had Asperger syndrome. Confusion, sensory overload. Some of those things, they're just there, part of our brain. But the meltdown, that's something we can reverse engineer. That's something we can stop and not rationalize the exaggerated response, which is not reasonable. But we can, and here's what we're meaning here, we can rationalize a reasonable response. That is, after we go through the meltdown, we say, now, we're thinking of a past meltdown. We think, what would have been a reasonable response? And having a meltdown is not reasonable, or it's not rational. So what would be a reasonable response? I know it's not that easy, because there are things and they're still there and they do trigger us, but what we're doing is we're confronting it. We are taking it in our hands. We are grasping it, and we are saying that we are going to control this thing, or we are going to get a handle on it, and it's not going to control us. So number 5 is this, journaling. This is something I think every Aspie should do, Aspergian should do, is journal. Because not everyone you meet rejects you. Some of them do. Not every person at the workplace is a jerk. A lot of them are. But what about those who aren't? Have you ever thought about that? What about people who are actually considerate and accept you as you are? Okay, the last 24 hours. Just stop and think. Wherever you are, stop and think about this. Last 24 hours. Think of something that somebody did to you personally that was considerate. But now, if you didn't go out and about, probably your answer comes up 0. But did somebody hold a door for you? Was the checkout clerk polite to you when you went to the grocery store, wherever? If you are brave enough to do that, was there somebody who was not abusive? Was there somebody who was kind, considerate when you were driving? Was there somebody who let you out in traffic? Or let you change lanes? Or, make a list of these experiences. And what you'll do is you'll find that they add up quickly. And there's something you can go back and ruminate on, because the natural brain will ruminate on those things that hurt us, always. Very seldom do we ruminate about the good things. I mean, sometimes we do. Holidays, we may stop and think about the good old times if we have any. A lot of times we say we didn't have any good times. Well, maybe not, but that's hard to believe that you had no good times whatsoever. Well, what we're doing is we are ruminating in real time. We are thinking about the good things that happen to us, which is not necessarily a natural thing to do, but it's easily done. We just have to be conscious about it. We have to do it consciously. And then write those things down. I mean, keep a list. On your spreadsheet, every Aspergian who has a computer has a spreadsheet. So I have a spreadsheet that says good things. And that's your journal. Number 6 is imagination. Now, this may seem a little bit odd, but there are ways you can use your imagination to help you cope. And that's what we're talking about, is coping with trauma, with panics. And one of them, this seems kind of silly, but if it works, it works. Imagine yourself as a monster that is eating, ripping apart and eating the experience. Yeah, that'll take a little imagination, but that's why we say imagination. Imagine yourself coping with the traumatic experiences. Now, one thing I would suggest, and I'm not a counselor, I'm not an advisor, but one thing I suggest to me is never eliminate memories of bad things. That is to say, never slip into denial, where we say, I'm just going to pretend that none of that ever happened. What good does that do? I mean, now you're in a state of the state of denial, and you can't cope with something unless you acknowledge that it happened. And then when it surfaces in your mind, and it will always be in your mind, you cannot get it out of your mind. It will now and forever be there on your hard drive. Cannot overwrite it. And if you try to suppress it, it's going to pop up. Like a pop-up when you're browsing a web page, and this thing just pops up out of nowhere. You will find that you have those traumatic experiences pop up, and they express themselves again as a panic attack, or as a meltdown. So don't suppress them, just deal with them. And imagining that you're eating it, or that you're controlling it, or that you're clawing away at it. That's a coping device. Number 7 is this. Congratulate yourself. Now, by that, I simply mean that you have acknowledged the problem. You have dealt with it. You have survived. Obviously, you wouldn't be listening to my voice at this very moment. So you are a survivor. You've gone through the hard times. You came out the other side of it. Now, I'm not saying there aren't any scars, battle fatigue, trauma. It's there, but you did survive. Now, the reason I say we need to congratulate ourselves is because, one more time, as I said earlier, the default position for the brain seems to be to focus on the negative. And I guess that's a self-preservation device that is placed in our brain by nature. But when we congratulate ourselves, what we're doing is we're forcing our brain to slip away from the default position to a rational position where, there is something positive here. And we balance that out. Now, we're not getting rid of the negatives because that's reality. But we are balancing the negatives with the other reality, which is we are survivors. So now we have a balanced, rational perspective, just of life in general, because we're looking at the whole picture. And to get a balanced perspective, gotta have a look at the whole picture. Now, number 8, I think, is the single most effective, the single most important coping device, and that is get help from a qualified therapist. What I did, I was going to say my suggestion, but what I did, and I've mentioned this in other videos, is I took some time and I sought out somebody who specializes in autism, because I wanted this not to be some side job that a therapist does, who has maybe a little bit of experience, a little bit of knowledge. I wanted somebody who was immersed in it, who deals with it every single day, who knows all the ins and outs. And I found that. I was fortunate. I found that person. So I would encourage you at least to try to do the same thing. See if there's somebody in your area who specializes in your challenge. Because sometimes you need, if you have a heart attack, you need a heart specialist. If you have a brain injury, you need a brain surgeon. You don't go to the person who clips toenails, or, I guess people do that. I don't know. To have brain surgery, do you? I can't imagine. So why would you do that with your Asperger syndrome, which encompasses every moment of your entire life? I mean, this is your life you're dealing with. So yeah, number 8 is seek out a qualified therapist. The objective of a toxic person is almost always to get inside your head. They want to control what you think. Somehow when you react to them, you react to them negatively. They just feel like that, hey, I got control of this guy. And so they say things and they do things to get inside your head, to play with your mind, so to speak. How do you react to that, or how do you respond to it? Well, we've got 7 things here to talk about, and number 1 is this: take control of your mind. And how do you do that? Well, it's really simple. When you initially feel this person is coming onto you, not in a positive way, but in a negative way, they're coming onto you, they're mentally, psychologically bullying you, the thing to do is to stop and think. Stop and think about what is happening, because the natural thing to do is to react. I've got a good illustration for this. If somebody were to throw something at you, say a ball, your natural reaction is to raise your hands and try to grab that thing, whatever it is, or to bat it away. And if they throw a ball at you, your natural reaction is to raise your hands and catch it. Now, when I did public speaking, sometimes I would actually illustrate this point by taking a Smurf ball. Is that what they call it? Smurf or Snurf? I can't remember, but a little fuzzy light ball. And I would put it in my pocket. I'd hide it in my pocket. But when I was making this point, I'd take it out and throw it at somebody just to see their response, and they'd throw up their hands and try to catch it. And then I would do the same thing to the same person, and I would say, this time, don't catch it. Just let it bounce off of you. You got to think. You got to think quick. Don't think reactively, but think responsibly. And so I took the ball, threw it at them again, and this time they just let it bounce off of them, usually. And that's what you do with a toxic person. When they're coming after you psychologically, think of it as I still don't know what it is. Snurf, I should have looked this up before. Snurf ball or Smurf ball. Whatever it is, just think of it in those terms and let it bounce off. Because what you're doing is you are controlling your mind. What they want is a reactive response. What you want is just a response, a controlled response. Now, you can't do this every time. Unless you're superhuman, maybe you can. I can't. There are times when people just catch me off guard. But by and large, I have learned to stop and think when toxic people come after me. All right, number 2 is this: observational detachment. Now, this is I would call one of the superpowers of people with Asperger syndrome, because we are, by our very nature, detached people. That's one of the things that makes us Aspies, Aspergians, is we are not really adept at being socially connected. And that sometimes can be a very positive, very strong thing working in our favor. So what we do is we stop and think of ourselves. Sometimes people may call you names like a space alien. Aspies tell me that all the time. That, particularly when they're in school, they call them names like space alien, or, what's wrong with you? You on drugs or something like that. But, think of yourself as a space alien. And you are neutral. You are just observing behavior of people the way a space alien would if they just landed on planet Earth and they are on a mission of observation. All right, so you got this toxic person, and they're saying something or doing something intentionally to get inside your head, and the first thing you do, as we said, is nothing. You just stop and think. I mean, from their perspective, you're doing nothing. But from your perspective, you are thinking. That in and of itself throws them off guard. But now, in addition to stopping and thinking, you are now observing from an objective perspective. So keep this in mind. The objective is to be objective. So don't think like I am offended. Don't think this person is offensive. Think there's a problem here between two people, as if you're not one of the two people. You're just standing back watching. And what that does is that gives you a whole new perspective. What that does for you, it's giving you control of your mind, control of the situation. All right, number 3 is this. Control your focus. Okay, you're not reacting, but you're responding. You are observing objectively, and now you need to focus. You need to stop and not just stop and think, but stop and think about what's going on here. What is this person doing? You stop and think this. This toxic person is trying to control me. What can I do to stop this person from controlling me? And again, people who have Asperger syndrome, they're just natural targets for these people. I mean, just natural targets. And some people just have a third sense. They pick up on it. You are an empath and they know it. And, you're just red meat to them. Very sad situation. But when you stand back and you stop and think and you focus on what's going on here, then you will put yourself in a position where you actually can respond positively and disarm the toxic person. And that's the objective, to disarm them so they can't get inside your head and control you. Now, that's impossible to do all the time because, quite frankly, when somebody makes you mad, whether intentional or unintentional, they're controlling you. They're controlling us when they do that. Now, maybe it's justified. Maybe we should get mad, and sometimes we should. Or maybe we should get sad or sorry or feel hurt or whatever. But every time we have those emotions, it is because somebody else or some circumstance. But speaking of toxic persons, it's because they got inside our heads and they evoked this emotional reaction. We don't want to react. We want to respond. We want to take back our minds. We want to control them, not let them control us. We want to do this. And this is number 5. This is what I call going poker face. And I have talked about this in other videos. And when we talk about poker face, what we're talking about is simply putting ourselves in a position where we are showing no emotions. And again, you got Asperger syndrome. This is something you probably do anyhow. You have that, what psychologists call flat effect. And you're just not showing those emotions. That bothers toxic people. That really bothers them because the way they control people is to get emotional reactions out of them. But you're not doing that by nature. You just let things, at least from their perspective, you just don't let things bother you. Now, in reality, we are internalizing those things. But to the toxic person, they want to control you. And so what do? They try to get inside your head to evoke that emotional reaction. Another way to say this, I guess, is just keep your cool, But it's not an outward thing. Normally it is. Normally it is, it's just poker face all the time. But now we are controlling not our outward appearance, but we're controlling our minds. Our mind is going poker face. We're just not reacting. Flat effect. Number 6 is this. And this is important. By the way, well, let's do number 6 and I'll tell you about number 7. But number 6 is this. Answer with questions. When somebody asks you something, don't answer them. Ask them a question. Because they ask a question to control you. And when you answer with a question, you are taking control. So people ask questions. Now this is so important, you may want to stop and write this one down. But people ask questions for one of 2 reasons almost always. In fact, I can't even think of an exception. Reason number 1 is they are asking a question because they want an answer. And number 2, they're asking a question because they want an argument. People ask questions for those 2 reasons. I can't think of any exception. Maybe you can. If you can, put it in the comments, educate me. But let's say, for example, somebody wants to know what time it is. So they will ask somebody, do you know what time it is? Or they used to say, do you have the correct time? As if you're going to tell them the wrong answer. I don't know why they said it that way. But back before everybody had a device, a cell phone or whatever, we wore watches. We didn't have the time with us all the time. And people would commonly ask other people, do you know what time it is? Or do you have the correct time? They just wanted an answer, not an argument. If you are a teenager and your parents told you to be home at 10 o'clock and you show up at midnight or maybe 1 in the morning and your parents meet you at the door and they ask the question, do you know what time it is? They're not looking for an answer. They're looking for a confrontation. So always keep in mind that when a toxic, controlling person is asking you a question, usually, and by the way, parents are supposed to be in control. And sometimes they need to be a little toxic just to keep kids in line. But that's not what we're talking about. So when you have this toxic, controlling person, and he or she is asking you these questions to control you, you take back control by asking them a question. All right, let's say you're at the workplace and maybe a toxic person, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but a toxic person may say, why didn't you do that? How do you answer that? Well, you don't. You just respond with a question. Why did I do what? Or why didn't I do what? Or why didn't you do it? Always come back with a question. And anybody who is involved in the art of debate understands this well. When you are debating somebody, in a formal debate or whatever, I was in politics for a while. And when you have people come up and want to argue politics with you, ask them questions. When they ask you a question, why do you believe this? Or why don't you want to do this? Think of a question to respond. It is a powerful tool for controlling the controller. Number 7 is this. Use disarming deflection questions. And I've got 6 of them. And I'm going to tell you what those questions are in the next video. But I got to tell you, the 6th one. The 6th disarming question. It's 4 words. A question with 4 words. And this is a question that disarms every toxic person I have ever used it on. So you need to watch, if you would please, watch for the next video, 4 words, or the title will be something like 4 words to disarm toxic people. Now, let me close out by saying, people with Asperger syndrome, we do not, or empaths in general, we do not have to be taken advantage of. And we don't have to change our personalities. We just need to make some subtle changes and use some basic human strategies. Yeah, it's really that simple. There is a powerful tool that will help you disarm toxic people, and we're going to share that tool with you right now. You ready? What we do is this. We use short, simple questions. Now, there is a reason for this. It is because the person who asks questions controls the conversation. If you have ever studied debate, if you have ever been in politics, you understand this principle very well. The person who asks questions controls the conversation. So when you are engaged in conversation, I should say, with a toxic narcissist or a toxic person, what you should do as a person with Asperger syndrome is defend yourself and equal the playing field using simple, short questions. Now, of these short, simple questions, and we have a reason for all of them, the very last one that we're going to share with you, question number 6. Yes, these are sample questions. Number 6 is by far the most powerful. So you're going to want to watch this video to the absolute positive very end, because we're going to drill down on these 4 words. The last of the 6 questions is comprised of 4 words that are designed to put the narcissist, the toxic person, in his or her place. Are you ready? Okay, let's dig into it. Now, question number 1 is this. The question is, what? That's a question. It's a one-word question. Now, why is that so powerful? Well, it's for this reason. When you are approached by a narcissist or a toxic person and they say something that is totally out of line, something that is designed to humiliate you or to put you down, what you are doing by saying what is you are simply asking the person to do 2 things. Number 1, you are saying, would you please repeat what you just said? And when you ask a person to repeat something, what you are doing is subliminally, you are asking them to think about what they just said. So when somebody repeats something, they have to stop and think, what did I just say? What did I just tell this person? And by repeating it, the absurdity of whatever it is they had to say becomes very evident to this individual. Now, granted, they will never admit it, and I've got to tell you, very seldom does a narcissist or a toxic person change their tone or change their ways. That's not what this is designed for. This is designed for self-defense, for you to put up a boundary so the narcissist understands that this guy or this woman is not a pushover. This is somebody who knows how to stand up for themselves, and they don't even think that consciously. It's just implied. But it's implied so dramatically that they can't miss it. Unless, I don't know, maybe they're intoxicated. They may miss it, or maybe they're just really not very bright. But for the average person, make them stop and think. That's the whole idea. And when they stop and think, they have to reflect on what they are thinking. All right, number 2 of 6 is this. Why do you say that? Okay, another iteration of this question would be, why do you ask that? Or why do you think that? And again, the idea behind this is to force the toxic person to reason. So typically what I have found with toxic people is they will say things with one objective, and that is to elevate themselves and to humiliate others. So when you say, why do you do that? You are asking them, in essence, why are you humiliating me? Why are you putting me down? Why are you elevating yourself? Now, when the toxic person answers your question, and if they're really, really smart, they'll answer your question with another question. But when they answer your question, that's got to cause them, on a subconscious level at least, to expose themselves to their own problem. Cognitive discord. What are they going to do? They understand, okay, I said something that is totally stupid. Now I got to dig myself out of this hole. All right, question number 3 is this. How did that silly notion get into your head? Silly? Yeah, how did that silly notion get into your head? Okay, why is that question so important? Because it places the toxicity in its place. It's silly, it's absurd, it's nuts. The toxic person that is bullying you or confronting you or putting you down and elevating himself or herself has to confront what he's doing. Same principle as the other questions. Number 4 is this. That's kind of selfish, don't you think? Now, this is a little bit stronger, in my opinion, because what you are doing is you are applying that this person is selfish. So this is kind of almost an innuendo where you are suggesting to the person that, you're a selfish person, but you're not calling them selfish because you're just asking a question. And you're just saying that, well, the whatever it is the person just said, that is selfish. You're not actually calling the person selfish, but you're implying that. It's a tacit way of exposing the person's selfishness. And when you do that, the individual has to stop and think, this guy's calling me selfish. Maybe I am selfish. No, I'm not selfish. I'm perfect in all of my ways. And, you just throw the guy off guard, or the woman, whoever it happens to be. The next one is this. Why should I believe you? And again, here is a suggestion. It is a tacit, implied statement. That's another reason why we form these as questions, is you're not calling the guy a liar. You're just kind of implying that he's not being totally honest. Why should I believe you? And it also brings the person's character into question as well. That this is not an honest person that you can trust. Why should I believe you? Okay, those are 5 of the 6. Now, what about the 6th one? What about these 4 words that nearly always put a narcissist into place? And I have used this probably a dozen times, and as of yet, it's never failed. It just puts the narcissist or the toxic person back on their heels. It just kind of blows them away because here is the question, and you'll see why. 4 words are, would you grow up? Question mark. All right, there can be different iterations to this. You could say, would you just grow up, or would you put on your big boy pants? I don't really like that one, but, there are different ways you could phrase it, but I usually say, would you just grow up? Now, why is that so powerful? Well, it's powerful because every narcissist, every toxic narcissist is, at the root, a toddler. Now stop and think about this for a second. When you are 1, 2 years old and you're just learning to walk, you're just learning words, there are 2 words that most every toddler learns. Number 1 is the word no, and number 2 is the word mine. That's narcissistic. Now, most people grow out of it. I mean, by the time they're 5 or 6 years old, they're understanding that they're not the center of the universe. And if they have good parenting, it goes beyond that, and they understand you're everything isn't just about you, but it's also about other people as well. So you have to contribute to those who are around you. You've got to be a part of it. You got to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem, or however you want to phrase it. But not so to that little toddler. Everything he sees or she sees, it's mine. Okay, right now I'm looking at a camera. If I were a toddler, I'd say, mine, even if it's not mine. Toddler, take them to a playground and everything there, mine. Take them to a store. Look, don't take that off the shelf. That's not yours. Mine. They grab it. That is a narcissist. They never grow out of it. It's kind of like a part of their brain, and I've never seen research on this, but I'm guessing there is a part of their brain neurologically that has never matured. It's kind of like it's just stuck stuck at the age of 1 or 2 years old. Now, some people intellectually, tragic to say that intellectually they are stuck at a very young age. And so they have special needs. And as a society, we take care of those people. But there are some other people who, though intellectually they may be normal or above normal, But when it comes to other components of their mind, their thinking process, they're still way, way, way behind. So a narcissist, a toxic narcissist, and everyone who has Asperger syndrome understands this, because you are confronted by these people constantly, because we are easy prey. Anybody who is an empath understands this, because we are just by nature easy prey for these people. Everything is mine, and there's somebody who will let me take it. Speaking of people who have Asperger syndrome, or people who are empaths. So they are saying, mine, 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 mine. My idea is the best. My car is the best. My family is better than your family. I have better ideas in the workplace. We're all going to eat what I want to eat because I've studied nutrition and I know more than everybody else. We're going to go where I want to go because, well, because me. There is no real logic or reason to that. That's why we ask some of these questions, to make them think. Okay, so you say, would you just grow up? What are you doing? What are you doing to the narcissist? What you are doing is and this is why this is so powerful, you are exposing the real person for what they are. You're taking away the mask. And there's one thing narcissists and toxic people hate more than anything else, and that is to be exposed for who they really are. Well, who are they really? They're toddlers. They do not want that to get out. They hide it because that is their security. They are truly, extremely, very immature people, toddlers living in adult bodies. Would you just grow up? How are they going to answer that? Well, typically they may say, well, why don't you just grow up? Doesn't matter. They can't unhear what you said. That question is now embedded in their minds. Now, if you say that with other people around, oh, they hate it. They can't stand it. I mean, the narcissist, toxic people. So here is this toxic narcissist, and he is confronting a person with Asperger syndrome, or he is confronting a person who is an empath, somebody who is easy prey, and he loves to attack these people, humiliate them before others. That's just the way they are. And you throw it right back at him. Why don't you just grow up? And everybody turns around and looks. Yeah, that guy is kind of immature. He is kind of childish. And it doesn't end there. It goes on and on and on and on. Let's take a look at 6 missteps and mistakes that people with Asperger syndrome often make. Now, we're focusing here on adults, but still, it's good for parents who have children with Asperger syndrome to hear this, because you can understand what your children will be facing as they get older. Now, speaking of older, I'm approaching 70 years old. And so I've learned a thing or two because I've been an Aspie all my life. And so whatever stage of life that you were in, I've been there. Different circumstances, but I've been there. So let's take a look at these 6 things. As always, I save the best till last, or nearly always. And we're going to make this presentation kind of short because, as you can tell, I'm losing my voice. It gets kind of raspy after I talk for a while. And let's learn something that you can apply, something useful that you can apply to your life. And mistake number one is just flat out denial. I don't know why, but some people just don't like being Aspies. They don't like being on the spectrum. I guess that's because there is a stigma attached to having Asperger syndrome. You see a lot of this on the internet, on social media. If they are going to ridicule somebody, sometimes they will say they are on the spectrum or they have Asperger's or something silly like that. But that's part of it. That's part of being human. People tend to ridicule and put down other people, and it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be Asperger's. They will ridicule anybody for anything. And so there is this state of denial that some people will, that's a position that some people will take with Asperger syndrome. But I find that most people, myself included, really embrace it. It's almost like a relief. Now, I don't know about you, and as we go through these 6 things, tell me if you identify with any of these. So, denial? No, I embrace it. I was so relieved when I went in for the session, and the therapist said, yeah, she obviously said more than yeah, but she said, yeah, you have Asperger syndrome. You're on the spectrum. You have high functioning autism. What a relief. Now I've got a name for it. Now, let's stop and think about this. Denial. If you were to be doing some, I don't know, maybe some construction work or whatever, and you hit your thumb with a hammer, would you deny it? No, I wouldn't. On the other hand, silly as this may sound, I wouldn't deny it if I didn't hit my thumb with a hammer. I mean, the point is, reality is what it is, and just accept it. And that's far more, in my opinion, that's far more superior to go through life accepting reality as it is. Number 2, sometimes we will focus on either the negatives or sometimes the positives. So you can focus on hitting your thumb with a hammer, which is what I would probably do because it hurts and it could be injured. Or we could take the other approach and we could focus on our good thumb and say, hey, I've got a good thumb, so why worry about the bad thumb? Now that's kind of dumb. Okay, call it the dumb thumb theory. Dumb thumb syndrome. So we can focus on the negatives of Asperger syndrome, and I guess there are some, or we can focus on the positives of Asperger syndrome, and there are many, or we can just accept both and be realist. Yeah, there are some problems with having Asperger syndrome, of being on the spectrum, but there are also a lot of positives to it. So why not just embrace and accept everything? Number 4 is this, what I call misdirection or self-diagnosis. Now, self-diagnosis of Asperger syndrome, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, even though I would prefer people get that confirmed by a professional therapist who actually knows what they're talking about. But when I'm talking about misdiagnosis of self-direction, I'm talking about things like saying, knowing that you have Asperger syndrome, whether it's been verified by a therapist or not, saying things like, or thinking things like, I'm just shy, or no, I don't have Asperger's, I'm just timid, or, I'm inhibited, so I don't have Asperger syndrome, I'm just kind of a shy guy. You know what? All of those things may be true. Maybe you are shy, timid, and inhibited, and that's very common for people with Asperger syndrome. It's not universal, but it's fairly common. But to deny that you have Asperger's, or to deny that you're on the spectrum, that to me is a problem. That's one of the missteps that Aspies make, is we try to disguise or to mask our traits by assigning them different labels, as if that makes them go away. Nah, you are what you are. You just are what you are. So a rose by any other name is still a rose. So why not call it a rose? So if you have Asperger syndrome, call it Asperger syndrome, or call it high-functioning autism, whatever you want to call it. Number 4. And I told you we're going through these things fairly quickly, and number 6, by the way, is the one that we're going to dwell on because it's the most important. But number 4 is what I call role-playing, and that is when we actually exaggerate our traits. Why would we do that? Now, there's another type of role-playing where we will be so self-conscious of our traits that we try to just totally dismiss them and we try to mask them. I see no reason in why we shouldn't embrace them. But when we do that thing called masking, it's like role-playing. It's like we're trying to be somebody that we're not. Now, everybody does that to some degree. It depends on your social circumstances. And if anything, people with Asperger's syndrome do less of it than most people. And that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. And so we may try to hide who we are. But there is a more sinister reason why some people with Asperger's syndrome do this other than just being self-conscious. And that is that sometimes we do it to gain sympathy from other people. In other words, we are being a little bit manipulative. And we're saying, I can't help it. I have Asperger's syndrome. When maybe we really could help it. But I say a little bit manipulative. Some people are considerably manipulative when it comes to this. I call this the poor little me syndrome. See, I have Asperger's syndrome, so I'm special. I need special consideration. That to me is role playing, and I think that's a serious mistake. We need to learn, my personal belief is we need to learn to accept who we are and just be ourselves and don't use our traits, our conditions, to manipulate other people. Number 5, this is another mistake or misstep that many people with Asperger's make, and that is making excuses. And this is kind of similar to number 4, only it goes kind of like this. We would say, it's not my fault because, well, I have Asperger's syndrome. What I have done in the past is I have made blunders. And in time, I realized that was a blunder. Should not have done that. And I don't know about you, but if I make a blunder and it hurts somebody, maybe not physically, but just emotionally, I feel bad about it. Now, that's typical of empaths, and most people with Asperger's syndrome, it appears, are empaths. But I've had a few occasions where I've made blunders that were so severe, in my opinion anyhow, that later in life I would go back and apologize to the person or persons that I offended. I don't do that a lot unless it's, something that really needs to be done. But I just had to come to this point where I said, no more excuses. No more role playing. No more excuses. And that brings us to number 6. Okay, really, we're not going to dwell on this, but it's important to note, in my opinion, that failure to disclose our syndrome, our traits, Asperger's syndrome, that we are on the spectrum, that we are high-functioning autistics. Failure to disclose that, in my opinion, is really a huge, significant mistake. Let people know who you are. Now, this is not the same as role-playing or misdirection to others. This is just being honest and saying, I do make mistakes and I do make blunders. Now, I'm not saying you would say this in these words, but just by disclosing that you are an Aspie helps explain a lot to other people. Not making excuses, you're just explaining who you are. And failure to disclose that you are an Aspie, I think, is a form of misdirection. People may not understand why you do what you do. Now, maybe you don't care if people understand or not. But if you're an empath, you tend to care what other people think. Not for selfish reasons, but out of consideration for the other people. And I would use this analogy just to close out here. And I think this is a good one. You tell me whether it's good or not. There are 2 guys. Okay, there could be 2 girls, whatever. But 2 guys, and they are identical twins. And one guy puts on his absolute positive best suit because he wants to look really, really sharp. And his twin brother does the same thing. Puts on his very best suit, which turns out to be the same as his twin brother's suit. These guys look identical in every way. Now, the first twin did this because he wants to show respect for other people. He doesn't want to annoy people by being untidy, by being not so well groomed. To him, it's a way of respecting other people. Now, his twin brother, on the other hand, puts on his nice suit so he can draw attention to himself, so people will respect him, so people will admire him. Well, how do you tell the difference? Just by looking? I don't think you can. But the point is this, no matter where you are on the spectrum, and I think there's a spectrum within the Asperger's traits. Some have more, some have less. But wherever you are, just be yourself. Don't try to impress people. Don't try to put your Asperger syndrome forward like a suit so you can manipulate people. And maybe not even to draw attention to yourself, but just like the first twin, out of respect for other people. Put on your Aspie suit. You don't have to put it on. You're already wearing it. But wear it with a dignity, with a patriotic sense of pride. And I think that is the way to show respect to other people. Look, there are two triangles on the screen. So there's a lot more to come. So just click on one of those triangles and let's keep on going.